we're going to allow folks to trickle in. An awkward moment of staring at the computer screen and my dog giving some background noise, and then we'll get started soon. All right, everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Kay from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with William Brewer, presenting his new book out tomorrow, The Red Arrow. He'll be talking with Tim O'Connell, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to William, Tim, and the team at Knopf. I always think of the Julia and Julia clip of Knopf, which one is it? Whenever I say that, so pardon me for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways that you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for our panelists, interact with fellow attendees, say where you're tuning in from. And then if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author or our other panelists tonight, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, The Red Arrow, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You got it for us, Will? You have a copy to show us? Look at that, look at that book. That's very a great beautiful design, right?
Yes, it is, it is.
I'm a sucker for a good jacket, not gonna lie.
Same.
You know how good that book is when you see that jacket. The Red Arrow is available tomorrow, comes out tomorrow. So you can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Ave stores, where you can purchase Will's book and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. The buy link will be in the chat. As thanks for attending tonight's virtual event, we are offering 10% off the featured book. Enter coupon code GreenlightEvents10 into the coupon discount section at checkout online for 10% off. Our interviewer tonight, who's currently taking the train and will be with us shortly, is Tim O'Connell, Vice President and Editorial Director for Fiction at Simon & Schuster. Publishing across genres and formats, he has sought to champion unique voices from a wide spectrum of authors. He'll be speaking with our featured author, William Brewer. William is the author previously of I Know Your Kind, a winner of the National Poetry Series. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Nation, and the Best American Poetry Series. A former Wallace Stegner Fellow, did I pronounce that correctly, Will?
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
He is a Jones Lecturer at Stanford University, and he lives in Oakland. William's new book, The Red Arrow, has been hailed as a work of unbridled imagination by author Charles Yu. When a once promising young writer agrees to ghostwrite a famous physicist's memoir, his livelihood is already in jeopardy. As things get worse, a propulsive story unfolds, ricocheting across the globe and a tapestry of literary allusions. Will is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then he'll be talking with Tim and with all of you. So please take it away, Will.
Thank you very, very much. Yeah, this is exciting. I used to live down the street, I guess up the street from Greenlight, and I used to go to the Crunch gym that's like 100 yards away from it. And then I would walk into Greenlight every day on the way home. And sometimes I had money to buy a book, and sometimes I did not, but sometimes I just read books standing there. But it's one of my favorite bookstores, and I'm so grateful to be doing this. I'm just going to read right from the beginning of the book very, very swiftly. I want to say, first of all, that I'm happy. This was not always the case. In truth, it was hardly ever the case. Even when I felt happy, I wasn't, because I knew that was all it was, a feeling, an illusion that would soon be chased out by something I call the mist. That I'm happy now can be attributed to the fact that the journey worked, the treatment worked. I won't describe the treatment yet, because if I do so now, I'll lose you. What you should know is that I'm 33 years old, of solid physical health, good levels of the new good cholesterol, low levels of the bad, proper pulse, no chemical dependencies, a professional failure. And I'm sitting solo on the Frecciarossa train, waiting to depart from Roma Termini for Modena by way of Bologna. I'm in Italy for my honeymoon. I was married in September 9 months ago, but we delayed the trip for better weather. Back on Piazza di Pasquino, at the very posh Giraffe Hotel, a 17th century townhouse converted into a temple of Italian design. Annie, my wife, is still asleep, as we both understand this trip is something I should do on my own. In the palatial king bed, an original piece by the famed furniture designer Guglielmo Ulrich, as is all the room's furniture, and after whom the room is named, and about whom I speak as if I've got a clue who he is. I don't. I'm going to Modena to find a physicist. Because of the terms of my contract, I'm not allowed to name or acknowledge him in any way, publicly or privately, until our project is complete and he has decided if he wants to credit me. For that reason, I will simply call him the physicist. Though if you're that curious, it shouldn't be too difficult to find the one famous theoretical physicist native to Modena. I need to find the physicist because he owes me a story. His story specifically. More specifically, the second half of his life story from our present moment all the way back to what he calls the great realization, the moment when he had a breakthrough in perception, as he describes it, after which he excelled in the study of physics, the result of which is his groundbreaking, though still controversial theory of quantum gravity. I'm not allowed to name that either. Everything from birth up to a year before the great realization I've already got, but it's the realization that matters. It is my ticket out of a sizable debt hole I created when I failed to write a book promised to one of our nation's largest publishers. Publishers who paid me a rather sizable advance I can't pay back because I blew it all on things like 4 days in the junior suite of the luxury Giraffe Hotel. Many dark-suited women and men in the Manhattan high-rise are eagerly waiting to give me a legal suplex if I don't deliver. The good news is that post-treatment, I'm able to forgive myself for getting into such a position, and I feel grateful for that. Yet no matter how profound the treatment was, how life-changing, and it was those things, I realize I can't ignore that the debt is still very real, still my problem to solve, and worse, that it haunts me beyond its financial implications. It's the last thorn stuck in my foot from years spent walking through thorns. Except not only is it keeping that time alive and keeping me connected to it, it's also got the power to infect the new life I've been gifted. And so even in my happiness and clear mind, I also feel anxious enough about the day's potential that I couldn't bring myself to eat anything from the G-Ruff's impressive AM spread, not even a prosciutto slice or a cube of melon to go with my morning cappuccino, which now in the gut has me feeling about as eager as possible for this train to come awake and race me closer to closure. The solution is simple. All I've got to do is find the physicist, get the rest of his story, and finish the job I was hired to do, which is to ghostwrite his memoir. Indeed, through a sequence of events that can seem either cruel or felicitous, depending on which side of a life-changing treatment you find yourself. I found myself in a position where, by ghostwriting the physicist's memoir, I could cancel my debt with my publisher. Whenever I turn in a new ghostwritten section, the money I'd normally receive in compensation is instead deducted from my negative balance. The more of his life I write, the more of my life I get back.
Excellent. Can you hear me okay, Will?
I can, yes, very well.
Excellent. I missed the introduction, as you know, and I will inform the others because I was riding on a train coming in to Penn Station. It might be what could be said to be a very red arrow moment when your life starts imitating what is being done or what is happening around you or what will happen around you or what has happened around you in the past. So there's a lot of things we can talk about. This book, and just to tell others who, again, I don't know how it was introduced, but I was the acquiring editor for the book. And I just want to say that it's very rare when you've been doing this for a while that a novel lands on your desk and you start to read it and you find yourself so wrapped up in the journey and that you know it's doing something remarkably powerful and remarkably new, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And it slowly wraps and wraps and wraps around you until you're just sort of in it and it becomes a journey. And that's exactly what the Red Arrow did to me. If it gets too loud in the background, let me know too. I don't know if it's, I guess the cacophony is almost fitting. But, I guess, and I've been looking at some of the reviews, I've been looking at the interview you did with The Guardian too. There's so many different things to talk about. There's love, there's happiness, there are also the big things. And then there's this idea of balance. And right when you were reading, I came back to that. Now, for those who have read the book, they'll know that there's two sections, two arrows, really two directions. One going out and the other coming in. And I felt like the whole narrative rests in this idea of returning to balance. And I thought maybe you could just kind of talk about that word. Being a poet, I know also you have a particular relationship with just single words, but I wonder what that word in fact means to you, and how it relates to the Red Arrow itself.
Yeah, sure. Balance. I mean, I think the co-word to that would be the presence of debt that is throughout the piece. So, I mean, in one way, there's the way a person is always feeling, at least in the novel, like there's an immense amount of debt, either financial or aesthetic or spiritual or something like that. So that's one engine of sort of balance. But then there is the sort of psychological space of balance that I think the speaker is often kind of calling from, after having lived much of his life in a space that was not balanced, that was tilted in the deeply negative and dark direction. And so something I think the book is trying to get at, or maybe make experiential for the reader, is the fact that mental illness, stuff like depression or even something like anxiety or something like that, is a disease where one's sense of time in the mind gets really, really manipulated. And in the case of depression, one is living very aggressively, often in the past, mulling over every minute of the past as a means of sort of justifying why they should not be there, either in the present or in the future. And then there's also the sort of co-partner of anxiety that comes with that, which is fear about the future in a way. And so if you have these sort of two spaces and the mind is constantly getting pulled in one direction or the other, it creates a feeling of imbalance in one's mind and then often in one's spirit. So while the book in some ways is often going in one direction, the mind is often going in another. And yet my hope is that throughout, the speaker essentially feels frictionless or in a state of immense calm or kind of stillness, even while the world they're describing, or rather the life that's being described, is one that was getting pulled often quite aggressively and negatively in either way. Does that help at all? Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, I'm happy you brought up the debt issue too, because I feel like that came up in I think the Guardian piece, and how remarkably like prescient it was for a particular generation of people. Feel this unknown, like what it's like. Debt is almost the definition of what anxiety can do to you. Like it's this negative space that occupies your entire being, and you can't touch it, you can't feel it, but it's always there. And the other thing about it is, I guess it's multiplying, right? Which is what depression or anxiety can do to themselves. I mean, I will say to anyone here that this was the other thing, that this was some of the, I think at one point I told my boss it was the best, like the not the happiest, I forget the word I used. I was like, this is like the most celebratory book about depression I've ever read. because it took it and it made it a tangible thing. And we can get into the treatment, and I want to get there, but like the book, maybe we won't start there because we'll lose people. But you know that was a particular interest of mine. But I also found that your narrative dexterity with this book was just off the charts. And again, I think it's kind of this idea of a still and moving point. We can go to like Eliot. You know, I think of Bert Norton. I think Bert Norton came up a lot when we were talking about the book. This. I think that for me, the Frecarusia is like the still point of the turning world. And there's all this chaos and movement going on around the windows, but this consciousness is sort of on it, traveling through time. And which also comes in very, very in a very important way at the end, which I also don't want to spoil. But what were you trying to get at with this sort of your relationship to a person who's traveling through time, who's traveling through space? But you're asking a reader to sort of sit and be with this thing, which is a solitary and sort of unmoving position. Was there a conscious decision on your part about attention, about time and attention? I mean, I'm just looking for themes in the book that I'd like you to kind of talk about, not in the book language, but just in your relationship to these things in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I write with the hope that people feel gripped to keep reading. I feel like I've been a reader much longer than I've been a writer. And for however many pages I've ever written in my life, I've read, hundreds and hundreds more. And so I know what it feels like when you're a reader and you can feel sort of considered and cared for by the person who wrote the thing, in the sense that they want you to feel compelled forward. I like that feeling, and I think I tend to feel drawn to artworks that have a kind of propulsive quality to it. I mean, even with something like music, like I have a deep admiration for Iggy Pop, and one of the reasons why is his music feels like it's electricity just sort of exploding right out of the brainstem. And so I think that that's something I want my fiction to sound like, and to have that quality too. But part of that too is I'm interested in really the music of consciousness, the way that consciousness feels in the mind. And I think that people sort of throw around the phrase stream of consciousness a lot. And I don't know if anyone even knows really what that means. But what I'm trying to capture here, I think, is the fact that we don't really exist in a linear reality. I mean, it's very often the case that a person is doing one thing, and yet in their mind is living in a memory or in the anticipation of something else. And that part of that is because, right, we live with this thing called an ego, which is just this essentially like a narrative device in your mind that's telling you a story about yourself all the time. And so if the book's interested in narrative, I think what it's in some ways interested in is the fact that we're kind of constantly telling a fiction about ourselves to ourselves. And so how could a book maybe capture that, and then capture someone who feels kind of slightly liberated from that compulsion?
That's a fascinating answer, and to think about it. And I'm kind of learning a little bit about the book as you say it, because also I liked what you said about caring for the reader, right? And our character, our narrator in this book, is also a reader. He's a compulsive reader. And I wonder if that's sort of what you were getting at, that these books he's reading, they were written in the past, yet they start to mimic, or his life starts to mimic them in the present. They almost become sort of timeless in a way, right? They're not, it's not a linear experience of the world. It's kind of blown apart. And I think particularly of the Jeff Dyer scene in Italy, where he's watching the bartender who's being mentioned in the book itself. And I hadn't thought about it in that sense before. And I wonder, is that a sort of correct interpretation of how reading and experience is sort of being passed on in the book, or paralleled, I guess, in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think reading is a way in which one has a kind of fractaled experience of consciousness, and which would inherently become a fractaled experience of time. I mean, when I'm reading someone that I think is knocking it out of the park, right, their consciousness is sort of overlaid on top of mine and drowns me out, and yet I'm still there. And I love that ability this really old technology we call like language or books can do that, can replace my mind within a space, but then at times align with my mind kind of perfectly. And because I don't like plan when I write something, I use whatever is happening as I go along. And so in the composition, you know, the Dyer stuff was serendipitous, and then I included it, and then it caused the book to change as it went forward. And I'm a real big believer in things sort of emerging out of experience, as opposed to trying to sort of drape a plan over experience. That tends to feel kind of stale and empty.
I loved that when I saw that about I remember when we were initially talking about edits, and you just kept saying, it'll be there, like as if, you know, it already existed and you were going to stumble upon it in the process, right? And it's not, I'm not getting into like channeling or divination or just like it's something to be arrived at, but there was this idea, I guess it's an egoless form of writing, right, where you're just kind of you're not constrained about what you think should be happening, you're letting the book kind of become, right? And then of course obviously the process of refining it is a different thing. But that is it's indicative in the text, you know. I mean, I thought when I first saw the way you had broken it up, I felt that very thing. And I love that you brought up fractals, because there is my, and it's a really hard book to talk about in some ways, because there's certain things and scenes I want to talk about, but I also feel that the ending of this novel, the sort of when everything starts slamming together, is one of the single best narrative high wire acts I've ever encountered. But there is a particular scene where in I want to say Sardinia, it's not, of course it's Sicily, where a narrator's standing on a rock and he looks out into the world, and I believe you evoke a fractal at that moment, right?
Yeah.
And because I always think of like the Mandelbrot set or things like this, and what, you know, the novel is kind of a fractal in itself. And maybe you could just talk about your experience with fractals, and how you think that they relate to the creative process and consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, the scene that you're describing, yeah, there's an individual, and the narrator is standing on a rock in a cove in Sicily, and stares at the water, and when looking at the surface of the water, essentially understands the fractal or granular nature of reality as it's described and sort of been proven to be the case by quantum physics as we understand it. But then part of what happens, right, is the narrator then comes to realize that the memory and the sort of realization he's just had, it doesn't actually belong to him at all. It was a realization that had happened to the physicist he's working for, you know, decades before in his life, and he had just misplaced the memory in his mind as one of his own. So right there, I would say is an experience of a kind of a fractal where so often we're uploading things and then we assume those things to be part of ourselves, that's who we are. But in reality, I don't think there is such thing as a self. I think a self is just this accumulation of material that's kind of constantly morphing as time goes on. I mean, I don't really think I'm even the same person I was probably a week ago. But like in the composition of the book, you could even push it farther, and that the scene that's being referred to there with the physicist is in reality based off of a moment that is recounted by the real life physicist named Carlo Rovelli, whose book I was reading when I was in Sicily when I was writing this book. And so I took the fictional experience, the real life experience of that, and then turned it into a fiction, and then doubled the fiction in the book itself. And that happens all over it. And that's a big experience, I think, of my crafting of a book, is that I take something that occurs and then I let it sort of mutate over and over and over again until it becomes something I could never have like properly imagined if I'd sat down and tried.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, we're having this really heady conversation. I know I was just thinking about this because I can't help. I was like, and it's funny that we're doing it in this way, because I also wanted people to know how funny this book is, and how insane, how many times I just laughed so hard. I mean, and there's a moment where our narrator meets his soon to be his sort of second agent, the person who's pairing him with the physicist, and a sub is dropped on the table. It's the Italian sub described like a torpedo, and I was just like, it was just like so immediately funny. And there is also a publishing character, an editor character who's desperate to get this book, who FaceTimes you, or FaceTimes the narrator. And I'm realizing that what we're doing right now, I kind of feel like I just hope my head is not as rectangular in this iteration.
No, it's
as that
it's not.
character.
It's got gentle curves, gentle slopes to it. Don't worry. Yeah, don't worry.
Once again, I mean, in this instance, I guess, the book is completed. It's coming out tomorrow. So it's I'm not hounding you in this instance. No. I'm congratulating you on creating this well-wrought thing. And I guess I would be remiss not to talk about psychedelic therapy and your personal experience with it, and how that sort of factors into the book. I feel like you read Michael Pollan's book, right, which as I understand it had a profound effect upon you. And then you yourself have experienced what is referred to as the treatment. And I thought, I'd be interested in you talking about trying to, I've never ever seen it done so well, but trying to put what is ultimately an indescribable experience down on the page, and why you chose to do it like you did. There's a particular way you deploy it in the book, which is very cool, which is also, and it's a very rigid way, right? It's a very structured way to deal with a very unstructured thing. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that, and without giving too much away about that particular device you deployed to talk about it.
Yeah. So, psychedelic therapy, I mean, from the jump, I would say is a thing to which I owe my life. I'm happy to say that. It completely saved it and then changed it. And in my case, it was the eating of a huge pile of psilocybin mushrooms. And it totally liberated me from depression. And that's something I then put to use in the book. I mean, I would say the book is is not a drug book, but is a book that engages with certain kind of what I would consider hallmark qualities of psychedelic experience, including the sort of disillusionment of linearity, but also the feeling of when you take a huge amount of psychedelics, or even if you kind of do a minor trip, this feeling of being kind of pulled along on something is sort of guiding you, and you don't really have much say about it. You just have to go along, which I think is literature, I think, is kind of an inherently psychedelic form, maybe the most psychedelic art form, in that you can pick up this chunk of paper with ink on it and then suddenly hear voices that aren't there, smell things that aren't there, envision things in your mind you would not have drummed up yourself. To me, it's a deeply sort of psychedelic technology. But when it came time to put some psychedelic material explicitly in the book, I originally tried to do it kind of just in the traditional prose form that I was writing in, and it wasn't working. And so I sent it to a friend named Gabe Habish, who's a really skilled novelist. And he called me on it and was like, this isn't the way to do it. I think you should go look at another book, and that has uses some graphic elements to manipulate the text. And so I did that, and that's when I figured out how to write it the way I did. And so I guess I'll avoid explaining it explicitly for people who haven't read it, but the material is not organized in traditional sentences or paragraphs. But my hope is that actually by doing that, it provides yet another more truly psychedelic way of experiencing it, which is instead of having a front top down run of it, one can have multiple experiences of the psychedelic experience. You could have it many different ways. I mean, mathematically, probably like hundreds of different ways to read through it, which in retrospect is actually like the most proper way to go about it. And it was a failure of my imagination to try to squeeze it into this really sort of traditional way. And so while it might appear rigid, I think what it actually does is liberate it to a more truly psychedelic form.
Yeah, well, you can experience it, linearly or vertically, horizontally, backwards, forwards. There's so many different. You can inhabit that space and sort of be disassociated from the text for a little while, and it's truly phenomenal. And there are times when you're, as an editor, you're reading along something, and this book is full of surprises, and then it manages to surprise you even again. I mean, and we haven't even talked about the West Virginia scenes. Like, it was really funny because you and I had a long conversation about autofiction during this time, right? Because there are obvious parallels to your life in some of those places, but then the sheer invention that you wrote with it with such sincerity, I think, that I was like, well, this must have happened. But then I'm like, wait a second, there's this thing called the fucking mist, right? Which is like actualized and real and forming. And I was like, that doesn't typically happen in something that's hyper realistic. It's really nice to get to do this with you, because I feel like we've talked a lot about the book during the process, but I never really got a chance to commend you on how difficult that is to take these things. And it's not a long book, right? But you travel in an immense amount of space. And I want to make sure while we're doing this too, if there's anyone in the virtual audience, if you have any questions or what have you, you could drop them in the chat and I'll try to find them on my phone, so we can let you ask what you might. But until then, I do want to get into this idea of the mist too, and just sort of, it's such a powerful force in the book. It's such a powerful force in the world, sort of stand in for depression. But what made you decide to describe it in that particular way?
I guess I would say that my own experience with depression is that it was sort of an immense hallucination, a really long, sustained, and awful hallucination. One of the main devices of which was to obfuscate, reality, and to keep me from seeing things, and then often hearing things. It got in the way. I mean, it's in a lot of ways, it's like not a terribly original phrase. I mean, people say I have brain fog, or like I feel my head feels cloudy. There's a bipolar depression pharmaceutical commercial currently circulating, the opening lines of which is, my bipolar depression makes me feel like I live in a fog. So, it's not like I think I pulled it out of the ether or something. I think it's actually like a really common experience. And some of the people who have spoken to me, who've read it, who have also struggled with depression, say, oh, that's exactly what it's like. So in some ways, I think it is just what it is, but instead I actually just leaned very heavily into the simple fact of it, and then animated it big time, and part of it was something that I wanted to do. Is I felt like often in books, depression is treated in the abstract, or it's sort of this thing that's off stage, and it was never off stage in my life. It was on stage, it was driving the car, it had control of the stereo, it ran the show. It was the most consistent thing in my life. It's been more consistent than anything else. It was the one thing I could always count on. And it was deeply physical. I mean, I felt it in my being. And part of what was remarkable about an experience like psychedelic therapy was literally feeling it get like shaken out of your form like a pound of dust, or in my case, like get cut out like a tumor. And so I wanted to make it like physical. I wanted to make it active, but also like in some cases like familiar. And I do think that notion of a kind of fog, I mean, when people feel good, they say, I feel clear often. I feel a real sense of clarity, and depression is very simply the opposite of that. I mean, it really is a kind of a clouding out of oneself, of one's mind.
I mean, I've heard myself say all of those things in those various ways. I do like that there's a sinisterness to the mist. And I do like that there are moments in the literal narrative in the past where a fog appears for other reasons. And there's a moment where I feel it's like sort of flooding into this character, literally invading them. And I also like, just how you just said this too, there's a time when it comes back and there's almost like this well-worn comfort, because it goes away for a while. For a while, our narrator is clear, and then it comes back, and which is kind of tragic, but there's also this like this, you're like, oh, this is I can back in this again. Like it's terrifying, but it's also, it can become a thing you become dependent on. It's as addictive as anything else in the world, right? It's funny that you bring up that commercial, because I feel like there's also, this is some of the best writing I've encountered about failed therapy sessions. Like the therapy stuff is just, it's too good. And it's an alternative therapy eventually that breaks the spell. So it's a loaded, hard question to ask, but would you, how do you feel like there's these prescription drugs everywhere, and it's a huge industry. It's a massive industry.
Yeah.
We're watching something similar happen to psychedelic treatment. It is being, it's like, it is the capitalism is coming for it. And I wonder how you feel about that. Is there a positive thing to it? Is there, certainly a negative thing in some ways, but the other thing seems to have failed a little bit. I mean, it helps for some people, and it helps a lot of people, but also there seems like there's this alternative that I don't want to condone, because it's ingesting a lot of, a massive amount of psychedelic mushrooms, but at the same time, it seems to be becoming more mainstream. And that's really the question I'm asking, like how you feel about that.
I mean, Western mental health care has been at a standstill really for a very, very long time compared to most other medical fields. It is way, way, way far behind. I mean, compared to what most other fields have been able to do in the last 50 years. No one really, really knows how the pharmaceuticals work. I mean, if they say they do, they're not really being honest with you. So they definitely help people. It would be irresponsible to say they don't help people. But it certainly seems to be the case that they're not knocking it out of the park. And in a lot of cases, they seem to just be sort of pushing something at bay or kind of putting a Band-Aid over something. So I think psychedelic therapy is like an extremely positive and hopeful position. As for the immense influx of capitalist interest in it, I'm not surprised. This is America, after all. But I can say with relative certainty that the people that are trying to do that probably haven't done much with psychedelics, because it's pretty hard to take a large dose of psychedelics and walk away from that saying, the first thing I need to do is exploit this to get it as rich as possible, right? It's sort of it's pretty much an anti-exploitation engine as soon as you put it in your body. So I'm not surprised by it, but and it's going to be a battle. I think everyone knew that was going to be a battle from the jump, but I don't really endorse it at all, and I sort of scoff at it. I hope people are able to get help, but the fact is there's been a lot of people who've been giving a lot of people help for a long time, and if those people are not listened to, all of those sort of heavily financed ventures that are going to try to open up these sort of like massive, expensive clinics, they're going to fail horribly, and it'll be really bad. Yeah. So my hope is that doesn't happen, and that people very quickly learn that they're dealing with extremely powerful chemicals that need people that have had a lot of training. Much of that training coming from even from traditional Western healthcare, and so. Fingers crossed that the right thing will happen, but who knows?
Yeah. It's an interesting time in the history of these drugs or treatments. I would say I remember decades ago hearing about like ibogaine and its treatment for addiction, particularly, and at that point it was just a very, very obscure thing, and talked about like. And mostly on messaging boards and such. But now I was like, wow, like I had never expected this to really come back. And I hope you know, my greatest wish is that there's a way to do it responsibly for things that actually truly can help people if there's access to them and they don't get corrupted by the forces that will get their hands in on everything. But it's because it is remarkable that at the end of the day there are these things in the world, made by the world, that can interact with the human consciousness in this way, or the human body in a way, to really help it. And there are also things that, you know, can also do the opposite. It's just it's such an interesting time and place in it. I think a little bit, maybe you could tell me if that has something to do with just the way that information travels now. I mean, these things often is the case, we're very singular. Like ayahuasca, you used to have to really travel to go and use, and now it seems like, you know, go online and you could probably find an all-inclusive resort that has
sure.
It has, like, you know, and so it's a tipping point. It feels like it's a tipping point. I feel like the book is coming at a particularly perfect time. I think you're very I think it's really amazing that you were able to write something as complex as that into your narrative and make it entertaining, make it funny, but also describe the terror that can come with it, and the terror you have to pass through, because it's not light, and at the same time manage to build this absolutely fucking stunning you know, closeout of the book. It's still the best thing that I've encountered in a long time. So I want to again commend you on that. I will try to look in the chat again to see if there's any questions. If not, I don't really have many other questions. I got these girls are doing their dance routine next to me here in Penn Station. It's definitely the first author interview I've done from the floor of a train station. Let's see. Oh no, that's just I think that's it. Do you have any questions for me, Will?
How's Rhode Island?
It's been fabulous.
Good. I'm glad.
I've taken up this is, well, see, talk about being on trend. You're gonna taken up cold water swimming.
Oh, wonderful.
Where I'm plunging into, like, you know, 40-degree water. And what I realized what this does, it's a very body, it induces in you a fight or flight response, right? So
exactly.
It produces a lot of the same chemicals that one might produce in a situation where they're, you know, need to survive or need to act quickly. And I've found that in doing this, I have less, I react calmer to things, and I do it every day.
Yeah.
And I think it's really a body training the mind thing, which I thought you would probably, you know, understand on a pretty intimate level.
yeah, it is. It's like that's a big part of a large psychedelic experiences, is that you have to encounter when the flight thing kicks in, you have to sort of stare at it and then let it pass, and then that's when the sort of euphoria comes swiftly after that. And cold water swimming has long been a way to sort of induce that without taking a drug. So I'm envious of that.
I said to someone the other day, I was like, you know, it's becoming popularized, and it's also very dangerous. You have to listen to your body. You know, 10 minutes, right when you really start to feel the best is when you have to leave, right? Because that's your body's basically fighting hypothermia so strong that this an incredible rush of euphoria comes over you, and you just want to stay, but you have to go. But I was telling someone, I was like, "Oh, it's totally addicting." They go, "No, it's not. Cigarettes are addicting. Plunging into freezing cold water is not addicting, but it is for me." So I think there is a question in the chat. So I'll look. So that's what I've been up to.
Beautiful.
It's one of the best things that's ever happened to me. Okay, here's a question for you. Will, how did you think about and decide upon how to tell the story of the actual central psychedelic trip? It's such a tough thing to pull off, and you make us wait for it. ...
How did I decide? I knew I wanted to put it in the book and I mean, the one that's in the book is manipulated a lot to fit the book, to fit what happens in the book. But what's the other part of the question? How did I decide? How did you think about and decide upon how to tell the story of the actual central trip? So part of it is I wanted to ground it in that this wasn't just going to be like a part of the story where a person just takes some drugs and then like walks around town or something like that. That it's really a turning point, and it's a thing that I sort of make people wait for it in a way because I want people to, I think, get used to the way the mind is working and what they're living, what the mind of the speaker is living with, so that when they go through it, the intensity of the encounter makes sense. You know, but part of it too is, I mean, I think a lot of people still don't really know what it is. Like psychedelics are definitely having a renaissance, and psychedelic therapy is becoming more mainstream or something people know about. But still a lot of people don't know. And I mean, I guess at the same time too, you know, I guess I think you bought this book in like 2019, you know, so like we didn't even know what COVID was at that time. I mean, people have spent a lot of time over the last 2 years starting to confront things like depression and anxiety because they were sort of forced to. So I think there's maybe a literacy there that wasn't even there when I wrote it. But I wanted to avoid people sort of scoffing and turning away at the jump. And so I feel like you kind of, my whole thing is like, when you write a book, if you do something really wild in it, you kind of have to earn it and pay the tax to get someone to go along. And so by waiting for it, it feels at once like a sense of arrival, a sense of explanation, also a new journey and adventure within the larger story itself. And then when it comes to like actually formatting it the way I did, I mean, part of it is like not trying to describe it in traditional like psychedelic art terms. I really don't like a lot of actual psychedelic art. Like I'm not dissing it, but it's just not my vibe. In fact, I find that one of the things I love so much about psychedelics is that like after taking them and watching, you know, the universe blow up into a million pieces, it makes looking at something like a tree or a chair very, very beautiful. It makes reality itself seem really, really remarkable. So I didn't want to kind of indulge it in that way. I wanted to treat it really like concretely and deliberately for what it is, and to acknowledge the fact that there's stuff in it like immense terror, like long periods of real terror, and that's something that one has to experience, or that one has to experience something like their limbs getting crushed, and that could simultaneously be like positive and negative, or that those ultimately that binary thinking like that like does not apply at all. But to do any of that, I think, you know, I sort of try to coax people into seeing how someone's mind after this experience works, so that when they finally get to the experience themselves, they want to say to themselves, yeah, I want to know how this person's brain got to be the way that it is now.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and I hope it does to Lauren too, because I want to use it as a way to segue into another poem or another question that's in there from Katie about poetry, right? Someone's asking if you're still cranking out your poems, and I want to ask you that question too, but I also want you to talk a little bit about like what's closer to the psychedelic experience, the linear sort of gambit of a novel, or the sort of vertical time experience that we can acquire, you know, we can experience in poetry.
For the first part of the question, I haven't written a poem in like 2 years, maybe 3, and I don't know if I will again. I'm hard at work on another novel, and that takes up so much time that the idea of then spinning a couple couplets together just seems impossible to me. So I'm not cranking poems, Katie, but thank you for asking. And then I don't know. I mean, I don't know if one necessarily has to be more psychedelic than the other. I think that all reading is inherently kind of a psychedelic experience. And I do think that there is a thing about fiction and about having the experiences of others and other lives and other perceptions matched or replacing your own. I mean, that is part of what makes psychedelics, and I think especially psychedelic therapy, so powerful, is that you do feel these things that necessarily aren't your feelings. You can feel how others relate to you, which can be a very important feeling if you believe that no one's ever felt a good thing about you in your life, for example. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense, and I think you're also right. I think, you know, having spent time writing poetry, having spent time in a poetry MFA, and then worked with a lot of fiction, it's I think I've come to the same conclusion. You know, that neither one is more. They're both such interesting art forms that in the way that they inhabit any space and time. I guess it's the second a word is on the page, you're kind of fucked, right? You can go up or down with it, or you can go across. It only makes me think of Merwin came to visit our MFA program, and I tried to ask a question, and I did that thing where you don't ask a question, you just talk at the person. And he was, you know, he was older at the time. He was trying really hard to follow me. And I was like rambling on about vertical time and like, you know, like four dimensions. And he was like really looking hard. And he was just like, I kind of finished. And I was like, what's W.S. Merwin going to say? And he was like, yeah. I was like, oh, for shame. Anyway, that was just I had some, I mean, you know, my experience of poetry and how important it is to me. And I love, you know, your work, particularly writing about what you chose to write about is really hard. And it's funny how there is a way that poetry can allow people to come at, I think, particularly devastating realities in a way that other art forms can't, which I'll always and forever love. You know, there's something about that air on the page, right? That lets these sort of words hang out there and, you know, acquires so much power. Let me look in the chat one more time to see if there's any other questions. I feel like we should be wrapping up pretty soon, so I want to say again that there's you know, the book comes out tomorrow. I know you worked. I know I have firsthand experience how hard you worked on it, and the thing fucking delivers, man. It's just one of the best reading experiences that anybody could possibly ask for. I remember I sent it to one of our blurbers, Kimberly King Parsons, and she was like, thank God for this. She was like, I feel like this is like good for everything. Like, she was just so excited that, because, you know, it does challenge you in a good way. You know, it's a very human challenge. It's an emotional challenge. It's an artistic, it's genuinely a new approach, I think, to the page. And I'm very fortunate that you entrusted me with it and that we had such a good time working on it.
Yeah, well, thank you for believing in it, as always.
So it's on sale tomorrow. I'm sure there's some pre-link somewhere that would allow people to get it from Greenlight. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there. If anything that Greenlight wants to say to close it out, I don't know if they want to.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Buy the book. Buy The Red Arrow. It comes out tomorrow. Just like Tim said, there is a link that is in the chat. You can also use the coupon code for attending tonight's event in all caps, Greenlight's Events 10. Into the coupon discount section for checkout online, 10% off. You can ship anywhere in the US. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I felt like I was listening to a podcast. I was just like, yeah. Like, this is so great. And like, no offense to y'all with you're not asking questions, but I was like, do we need questions? Yeah, so thank you both so much. I really appreciate you, Tim, taking the time out from your train ride for this conversation.
Wherever you're going safely.
Yeah. Say hi to the people pen for us.
I will.
Happy pub day to you, Will. Congratulations. The book sounds amazing. I can't wait to hand sell the heck out of it on the book floor.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you for the questions that we did get. Sorry I threw shade. I mean, listen, it was a great conversation. So from the team at Greenlight, thank you both. And thank you all for coming out tonight. Buy the book.
Excellent. See you guys.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good night.